Right. So I have to somehow navigate around this little thing. They told me to ignore it completely. I know. It's probably not doing much, but yeah, so we'll just keep moving around. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to come today. We have some really interesting and exciting speakers. I was told to take my 10-minute, 15-minute preamble to warm up the crowd and compress it down to 2 minutes. So Louise always does that to me, so I'll be very brief in the introduction. My name is John Carabin. I'm the Senior Director for Cybersecurity for NTT. And I have the pleasure of hosting you today in this interesting end of the year. It's 1st of December. It's the first day of summer. This for me is my first run into Christmas, the first sort of Christmassy event. And of course it was 1-0 Socceroos versus Denmark last night. So go the Socceroos. There is a few people with tired eyes. I got woken up at the hotel. I was in Melbourne with the cheering at about 3 o'clock in the morning. So if I look a little bleary, that's why. But we have a wonderful session today, as I said. Just before we start, of course, as is tradition, we would like to recognise these beautiful lands that we sit on, the lands of the Gadigal people, and we acknowledge the elders, past, present and future, and pay our respects to them. And it's a little bit of a similar theme, actually. We're going to be looking at past, present and future in some ways with regards to IT, what's sort of been happening over the last year. We thought this would be a nice time to do a little bit of reflection. Have a look at how the wonderful digital transformation projects are sort of going, and perhaps where some of them have gone wrong. And of course, there's been plenty of reminders more recently of some significant issues that have occurred when perhaps culture or approach, methodology or architecture doesn't quite line up with some of the strategy. And today we'll be looking at that. We have some of the deep experts from Palo Alto to talk about the security landscape that we've been observing and seeing. We'll also be looking, and Sean Duca will be taking us through a little bit later on, in the threat landscape that we expect to see over the next few years, which is both terrifying in the same breath, but better to know and prepare and be ready for it. We have a panel a little bit later on too to sort of go through some of the experiences we, NTT and Google and indeed Palo, have had in terms of good IT projects and indeed bad IT projects, and there's been plenty of lessons learned. Towards the end, we have a very exciting conclusion to the day. Anders, sitting at the back there, who is a futurist and consultant to many large companies around the world, an observer, a gatherer of information, and then someone that can sort of take businesses through to that next step of where they need to be thinking to be competitive, not just today, but in 5 and 10 years' time. So some very exciting topics. We're going to kick off today with Ricardo. I've known Ricardo for a number of years, and there's been some really interesting observations, I think, that we have discussed. We've been on joint panels before in terms of really sort of the landscape that we've been sort of dealing with. And so, Ricardo, over to you, and we'll talk about some of the findings later.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you everyone for coming today. So as you have heard, my name is Ricardo. I am the CTO for Australia and New Zealand, and I'm Italian, which means that for me the World Cup doesn't exist. And I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't want to know about it. So let's move on from that topic. What I will talk about instead is, given the name and the title for the session today, cloud control. What are the trends that are impacting cybersecurity, and how can we better tackle them, especially when it comes to the cloud? And it's no news to anyone really that cloud transformation and digital adoption in the cloud has been happening for a number of years. But I would say not so much in a linear fashion. We kind of started suspecting or be suspicious about the cloud a few years back. The cloud was like, yeah, we could go there, but it's a bit dangerous. And then it became, actually, no, we are pretty confident. We should adopt the cloud. We should enable our users to access it and our applications to be built there. And then everything happened in a space of 2 years during the pandemic. If you didn't have the cloud, your business probably wouldn't survive. So everyone amassed their assets and applications towards the cloud because it was cheaper, it was easier, and more agile to maintain. And in the first 10 months of the pandemic, we literally pushed the same amount of workloads to the cloud that we did in the previous 10 years. So that is a lot of cloud workloads. Interestingly enough, we are only about, current estimates are more about 13 and 50% of all assets are currently hosted in the cloud. But we see that growing at that speed. So by 2025, probably half of all the assets that organizations own today will be hosted in the cloud. And luckily for us at Palo Alto Networks, we have made a bet on the cloud now 4 years ago. Our CEO, who came from Google, his name is Nikesh Arora, made a conscious decision to make us a cloud-first security vendor, which included the acquisition of over, I think, as of last week, 19 vendors in the cloud and assembling them in a proper platform to deliver all the capabilities required to secure the cloud itself. The second topic that I want to talk about is actually the nature of work. We have changed the way of working in the last 2 years majorly. We always had the capability to work remotely, but we didn't leverage it as if it was the norm. And now it has become the norm, but it has introduced a few problems. And so I will discuss the better way to approach the problem with architecture and how to make sure that we can be ready to support the workforce in a dynamic way. And finally, I'll actually just briefly talk now about the threat landscape that affects the cloud, or how quickly attackers are evolving and using new methodologies, fully automated methodologies to attack workloads in the cloud. And we know that if we make a mistake over there, it's going to be amplified. And so that's exactly what attackers are going after. And I'll leave it to Sean's sessions and the panel probably to touch on those topics specifically. But starting with assuring hybrid workforce, leveraging the cloud. Now, as I said, we used to go to work. Before the pandemic, we actually had a 9 to 5 in the office. It was pretty much the guaranteed for the 99% of the population. And we either physically went to work and we sat behind our desk, or in the rare occasion we couldn't, we connected via VPN. That would put us right on that same network. And funnily enough, that network was always protected by some sort of a perimeter. That was the way of doing cybersecurity. And then if you had to go out to SaaS and cloud applications, you had to cross that perimeter, and there were some security controls in place. But what happened in the last 2 years is that we realized that work is actually not a place. It's an activity. We can do it from anywhere. We can deliver work to people, in fact, because if we give access to applications and data, people can literally work from anywhere. And so the new model of accessing data and application completely changed, and that perimeter approach, so putting all the eggs in one basket and the security controls in a static location, just couldn't adapt. In fact, we realized that we needed a way for users to reach applications directly, regardless of where they were or where the applications themselves are located. So a new architecture, right? That's where I was going. We can't rely anymore on funneling traffic through some static perimeter and then out. But the problem is, if we change and establish architecture, we encounter issues. There are new ways of attacking the attack surface. Like every time we go home with a device, we make that a new entry point to the organization that we can use. But if we get exploited, it becomes an entry point for an attacker. And at the same time, the applications are, as we said, sprawling through clouds, and not just one cloud, multiple ones. And one interesting statistic is that the average amount of security products that companies are using today is around 76 to secure the cloud. So in order to make sure that we use all clouds and we secure all clouds, we need to somehow fragment into multiple single products to fix the problem. So something is not right. So how can we best approach the security of users accessing these applications and data into the cloud with a new architecture? And that has been formulated by Gartner now for a couple of years, and it's defined as SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. Another new acronym for you, well, probably not new anymore. But the idea behind SASE is, well, if we can't have a static perimeter, let's not build a perimeter in the first place. Let's build a security control that can scale and can be leveraged directly from the cloud. And we are proud to say that our SASE solution actually uses Google Cloud as its foundation, because we know that in order to scale at hyperscale capability, we need to leverage hyperscalers. But it has to sit in between users and the destinations they're trying to reach at all times. So no matter if you're working from home or from a remote branch or in mobility, when you're accessing an application that can be in your data center, or it can be in a branch, or in a cloud, or in SaaS, you're always going to be consistently controlled and secured through the SASE architecture. So that's the idea. Now, the interesting thing about SASE is that the talk of the market, and especially from Gartner's perspective, has been, well, these capabilities existed for a while. We're talking about secure web gateway, ZTNA, CASB. But if you approach them in a fragmented way, you adopt a single solution for each one of these use cases, you might come up with something that resembles a SASE, but it's actually not ever going to be cohesive and consistent. So obviously, we have made a big effort to provide a single solution that can tackle all those use cases and can be the base of your architecture, so that you can start with one use case specifically and expand out into all the other ones whenever you need to. And I would like to break down just the first letter of the SASE acronym, secure. Secure for us at Palo Alto Networks has always meant following zero trust principles. We do believe that zero trust, although being a buzzword, it's actually a very effective strategy. And actually, it's all about finding context, asking those 6 questions: who is doing what, where, why, when, and how, are important in order to extract the right context before granting access to users to any applications. Now, the problem is that not every SASE solution does follow zero trust principles. And we believe that we need to be mindful to truly leverage least privilege principles, so only the right users access the right applications at any given time. And that requires high contextual identification and inspection. We need to be mindful of continuously monitoring the posture of the device connecting through a SASE architecture. Most other vendors check at connection time and never really fulfill the ongoing compliance requirement. Continuous security inspection has to be enforced not just when going to the internet, but also when connecting to your private applications. And again, there is a conflict here, because a lot of the SASE players claim to do security outbound because that's where you don't know where you're going. But if you're going to your own applications, no need for security inspection, it's your own stuff. Well, that's exactly how attackers think. If you don't inspect towards your own stuff, then we're going to enter that way. And also, we want to be able to not only do security, but data protection at all times. And not distinguishing between applications that are located maybe in SaaS, or are completely designed to run as a web application, or within your premise, or in an infrastructure as a service. So all these use cases are really relevant to a zero trust approach. And if you do that in SASE, you're going to do it securely. So just a couple of strategic considerations based on what I just mentioned. People are realizing that SASE is the answer to the problem of remote workforce and hybrid workforce. How do we keep consistency and security accessing any location? But maybe they don't invest in the right architecture from the beginning. The right architecture from the beginning means having something that you can build upon your use cases. You can start with a VPN replacement. You can start with an SD-WAN project. But if you adopt the right architecture right there and then, every new use case can be an add-on and not an additional product that generates fragmentation and operational complexity. The second one is exactly about that. SASE doesn't have to be adopted all at once. Those use cases span multiple projects at the same time. But you can start with one and build the other ones upon phases. And once this is done, you will see that you can benefit really from the consolidation that the interface gives, the management, the management operations are going to be benefited from, and really stop the fragmentation game that cybersecurity wants us to, or pushes us towards. Now that was the first one of the two topics that I wanted to touch on. The second one is cloud control, as the title of the event, and especially about applications that are natively built into the cloud. Now we know that, as I said before, there is not just one cloud, there are many clouds, and we want to give our developers the freedom to use whichever cloud suits them best. We want the best time to market, we want applications that are built continuously, effectively, with agility, and every cloud has its own benefits. So the majority of corporations normally adopt at least 2 clouds from different vendors. But then comes the problem, how do I secure them consistently? And securing the cloud, it's actually hard. And this is an interesting statement from Gartner that if I said it myself, you'd be like, whoa, that sounds a bit pointing fingers there. But the truth is that Gartner is stating that until 2025, they expect that 99% of actual cloud security compromises will be the customer's fault. What does that mean? Well, it means that it's not so much that they don't have the technology, but maybe that they're not using it properly, they don't know how to use it, or they haven't followed, as John was saying before, the proper procedures, methodologies behind the technology. You can't just fix the problem by deploying more tech. You need to also have the right processes in place. And when we're talking about applications built at the speed of the cloud, we're talking about recycling a lot of code. So ecosystems that rely on open source code are inherently fragile. You can see this little comic, which is a great one that represents exactly how the Log4j vulnerability was discovered and tried to be fixed. Someone had built this lovely DLL application, or let's say package, that was holding up the entire ecosystem of applications for millions of corporations, and no one knew. And when that became vulnerable, they expected him to fix it right there and then. It's like, hey guys, I'm doing this for free. Why am I supposed to fix a problem? You are using my code. It's your problem. But this keeps happening. And the reason for that is that we inherently trust the code and the open source code that we utilize. And again, you see the word trust and zero trust comes to mind. We should not trust code that we use continuously. And if we are trying to secure applications that are built natively in the cloud, there are typically 3 major phases: the code and build phase, the deployment, and then the running side of things. And at each one of these stages, things could go wrong. There are so many possible vulnerabilities in any one of these stages in particular, but they all really boil down to a problem of trust. We might trust the identity of our developers. And what about someone compromising an identity and started coding their own packages, as it has happened in the SolarWinds attack, for example? Then we trust the code that they use because they keep recycling. No one wants to reinvent the wheel. Log4j. Then we need to trust that the CI/CD pipeline is secured, that no packages that are not coming from our proper repositories or maybe compliance requirements are followed. And then once the application is running, maybe in a container format or a VM, that it's not compromised. So there's so much trust that we put into the whole process that it needs to be eradicated. That's how zero trust can be applied to the cloud. So the correct way of doing that is having, again, a single platform that can interact at every phase of this application development lifecycle, checking identities of developers, and I think Sean is going to have a few points about that later on, making sure that the packages that are used today are not vulnerable, but constantly monitoring, because we know a package that is safe today might be compromised tomorrow. And an image that we have built with that package 10 years ago will be compromised tomorrow. So we need to constantly monitor those repositories. Enforce compliance into the CI/CD pipeline, building those guardrails to make our developers run as fast as they can, but without ever going off the road. And finally, once the applications are running, we need to stay in touch with the runtime environment. Have the ability to see if anyone is attempting to exploit maybe that vulnerability that we just discovered and we haven't yet taken down the applications, or detecting anomalies in the pattern of communication between our workloads that are running in the cloud. So this is how security in the cloud at the speed of the cloud can be achieved. And I'll conclude with the strategic considerations for security of applications in the cloud. Multi-cloud means being consistent. We need to be applying the same principles and controls that I just described across multiple clouds. And the only way to do that is really leveraging a third party that has the ability to have those visibility controls. We want to accelerate security at the speed of the cloud and the speed of developers. So we can't wait until applications are developed to then insert security. We need to do it throughout the life cycle, as I just described. And you can pick up the third point is actually the same one from the previous conversation. Consolidation, consolidation, consolidation. Every conversation I have with customers today starts with that premise. We have too many tools, too many different control points, too many interfaces to manage. We need to consolidate. Do more with less. And then you're going to be able to secure both working from home in hybrid ways and the cloud itself. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Panel members, thank you. So Nathan, probably wanted to, if we could have the other panelist, Stefan. Thank you, from Google. A somewhat well-known hyperscaler, perhaps.
Yeah.
And Dom, again, from Palo Alto, who's got deep experience in cloud application security, and obviously that sort of is the foundation of trust in a lot of the things we're doing. But Nathan, maybe to throw the first question to you,
Sure.
Where have things gone right and where have things gone wrong in some of the big projects that perhaps your business has been involved in over the last 12 months?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think maybe if we start with where things have gone right to start with, and I think Ricardo mentioned it. I mean, we saw a lot of really, I think, rapid adoption during that pandemic period as well. So I'd say some of the things that we got right was perhaps getting over some of those barriers that were keeping us out of cloud to start with. So we saw a lot of that rapid adoption and perhaps which was good in terms of people's changing thoughts about just outright objecting cloud in that operational space as well. So I think from a positive standpoint, that was good. I think a number of people upskilled as well. And I think one of the key things that we're seeing, and I'll come back to that as well, is the need to really upskill in this area as well. Us as a GSI, a system integrator, we somewhat mirror our clients in terms of needing to continually assess where our skills, where our learning is today in some of those legacy architectures and where that they need to be in the future. So I think I spoke to a number of clients that had various initiatives in place to rapidly upskill their people as well. So I think they were some of the positives that we observed and some of the successful projects, and perhaps less about negative but more around where we see clients sort of getting stuck and where clients are up to in the journey and the sorts of projects that we're now engaging with, and they really are about, I guess, moving to that next level in terms of thinking about operations. So now that there's so much workload or a good proportion of your workload in the cloud, thinking about how this hybrid operating model works. And that's where I think we've seen some of the things that Ricardo spoke to again, which was inconsistencies. And I probably that's probably the key observation that we make, is there's a ton of inconsistencies, whether that's just in between the various silos that people adopt on premise, and then perhaps some of the new types of teams that we think clients need within the cloud as well. So less siloed, and I think Stefan, I'm sure later on, will talk to sort of that whole sort of DevOps and Sec DevOps model that's needed as well. So I think that thinking about how to be consistent across on-premise and the multiple clouds is an area that we get involved in. And I think the other area that I'm seeing now is just, and we spoke to this before, right, that I think there was an assumption in that early cloud adoption that cloud would be cheaper than on-premise. I think lots of people have come to the realization that it isn't necessarily in that first pass as well, but more importantly, they acknowledged that, but they said, well, I'm going to cloud for speed. But then we also saw some of these areas of inconsistency, lack of skills, so they don't get the speed deliverable either. So I think when it comes to cloud, it can be operated efficiently, it can be with speed, but you have to change the way in which you operate. So lots of the work now is about how do we help clients change the way in which they operate, how do they become more efficient from a commercial perspective, so that FinOps aspect, sort of adding to that whole sort of development sec DevOps that we talked to before. But that's one other area that we're really helping and working with a lot of our clients with now. So.
Yeah, great, thank you. Stefan, does that resonate with you, and do you have those awkward conversations with clients about having the right and wrong expectations? Do you have to educate to some degree?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, if we would have this conversation 6-7 years ago, it was very much to the point that you made before: is cloud secure enough, right? Should I put things in the cloud? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of customers, if not most of them, are past that point. Yeah. I think the struggle that we're seeing is that we need a shift in thinking in terms of we've been doing this like this for so many years, and when I say this, security, why would we do it differently in the cloud, right? And that's where we see the biggest challenges, trying to upskill customers, partners, to the point where we understand that, yes, some of the things that you've been doing for all these years are valid in the cloud, but there's a whole set of them that are not. And that's just because the way the architecture, the way the cloud is structured, it's so much different than what you do on-prem, right? So we see customers that do that early in the stage, they struggle less, but a whole set of customers, I've never seen a customer that said, tomorrow we're going to go to the cloud, and then they start moving. Most of the customers, they come to realize that a whole set of their capabilities are already in the cloud before they even thought about, hey, how are we going to put some guardrails in? How am I going to secure that, right? So getting to that stage of thinking differently, that's really one of the biggest challenges that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw the 99% problems to you in a minute, Don. So that was a great statistic, frightening statistic. But just on that, I think what you're saying is very true, that you can't take the existing frameworks and thinking and necessarily just chomp them into the virtual cloud environment. You do actually have to think about it in a different way, different skills and different capabilities. I think we'll talk a little bit about that later on, that sort of application world that's starting to open up, and how you can engender and build a different sort of mindset. But Dom, actually I had this at a board meeting just recently where they said, well, should we just move everything to the cloud, and will that make our business more secure, more resilient? And looking at that 99% of security failures will be customer faults does sound a little bit frightening. I mean, what's your opinion? What do you tell clients?
Look, I think if you look at the market and things that have happened...
Is the volume up?
If you look at the market and the things that have happened even locally within ANZ over the past 3 to 6 months, it really emphasises the importance of having that continuous governance in terms of what's happening in the public cloud. Visibility is a key aspect. Right, and the reason organisations are moving from on-premise to the cloud, like Stefan was talking about, is speed and automation. Right? How can you keep up with that rate of change? And it really sort of focuses more from that reactive space, where we've traditionally done that in a traditional data centre sense, where we're trying to embed ourselves in creating security gates as far left with the developers. And one thing that I've absolutely seen is the decision makers have really shifted from traditional security people, where now the developers who are building these applications, building these patterns, going and orchestrating these digital transformations, are really the ones that are building the governance, the direction, and the frameworks in order to help that from a business perspective. So it's really, really shifted from the far right to really the far left, and really sort of ties into what Ricardo was talking about in terms of creating those security controls as developers are going through that journey and building that next generation of applications.
Yeah, and I think industry is talking about a few things at the moment. The sense we're going to a bit more of an austerity period where budgets are being looked at. Organisations, and we're having these same conversations, are looking at efficiencies. They're having to deal with another big problem, which is a skill sets issue. So there's some really interesting conjunctions sort of occurring in the space. I read only yesterday that AWS has lost this year $10 billion on their hardware platforms, largely Alexia. And AWS is not a slouch in the cloud business. They've done very well. But even good companies do not always make money, and efficient and effective decisions, let's say, in some of these strategies. Nathan, what's your kind of observation around strategy? You must be talking to clients. Do you occasionally say, no, this doesn't work? Or, how do you need to have them shift their thinking a little bit, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting on the topic of strategy. I remember a couple of years ago, everybody was saying, trying to create a cloud strategy, and then there was the sense that, the decision was somewhat made. We know cloud's going to be part of our business in terms of, enabling that next sort of iteration, that digital iteration of our business. So people moved rapidly into let's just get there in that phase. I think stepping back now and the piece that we focus on is maybe to your point of we're entering this next period where we know we're going to be challenged from a cost and operational perspective. So one of the areas that we look at is just taking that position of how can we take cost out through better operational management in this area, and where should we put some of those investments in, and they may not have been in the areas that you might have first thought. So what's the stepping back and saying what's the value of a consistent security policy as an example? What's the value of making sure that my people are trained in some of those areas? So I think they're just a bit more of a holistic approach to some of these, cloud adoption in particular, John.
Yeah, no, great. But Stefan, Google is an innovator. It's one of the leaders in the space. Do you have conversations? I know your sort of speciality is the security side, but do you have those sort of conversations about what's right, what's wrong? Google's well known as an analytics specialist, bringing together some of that thinking. How does innovation and strategy kind of pan out with your conversations?
Well, I think if we look back a little bit, right, and we look at cloud and we look at, I wouldn't say legacy cloud, but cloud in the beginning, right, where people just said, let's take a server and we put it in the cloud, and to the point that you were making, hoping that we will save some costs, and that didn't turn out, right? So what a lot of customers are looking for at cloud nowadays is what are some of the added values that you can provide without me as a customer needing to do operations that is not core to my business, right? If I run a manufacturing company, I make no money by having 100 engineers that need to go and do data crunching for my data analytics that I want to do, right? So the way customers are asking us to innovate is really to provide cloud services that they can use and consume in such a way that they don't have that operational overhead. And that is a big shift that we're seeing, right? If you look at 5 years ago and you look at what was available then, a lot of customers had to build all these things together, right? So you got all these large cloud operating teams that existed for the sole purpose of operating what was in the cloud, which from a cost perspective is not different than having a large operational team that needs to manage something that is on-prem. So that additional operational margin that you save is not that different unless your cloud provider starts innovating and provide those services in a way that is more directly consumable. Right? So those are the things that we focus on. And to the point that you were making, yes, data analytics, AI, ML, those are the things that customers want us to innovate on, and those are the things that we do.
Yeah, and they offer great advantage, but you have to get it right. I suppose that's a nice segue for you, Dom. Skills shortages and human error, does bring us into automation. Is that a panacea for everything, or is it part of a solution? How does that play in with the Palo kind of vernacular?
Look, automation and orchestration is sort of key to moving to public cloud. You mentioned a little bit earlier when you start talking about things like lift and shift. In my experience, talking to particular customers when we're going down that path in terms of lifting a monolithic application and putting it into a cloud provider, usually ends in disaster. It's really about, like Stefan was talking about just a moment ago, in terms of leveraging some of these native cloud services that really help you from an efficiency perspective. Customers are getting a lot more educated in terms of what's available to them as of right now. At the end of the day, what's their key differentiator? It's traditionally their application that can service their data. Instead of building infrastructure to deal with dynamically scaling in and out, and we talk about a lot of things like containers, how can I easily consume something like in Google, like Cloud Run, where I just have to worry and focus about deploying my application to service my customers instead of worrying about all of the underlying infrastructure. Obviously, there's security components that need to be wrapped around that to make sure that you're not using open source packages like Ricardo was talking about, introducing vulnerability and compliance issues. And that's probably one thing that Palo Alto Networks is very focused at, is doing that as far left as possible.
Yep.
Why introduce vulnerabilities where, if you think about it, I've got a piece of code, and as my developers are writing that piece of code, I can tell them that that particular package that you're using right now introduces these 5 key risks. I'm better off doing that on the developer's machine before they start deploying it to Google, to hybrid environments where it's exposed to the internet, potentially raising things like alerts, but more importantly, risk to an organization, right? So that's why it's really, really important that through that whole phase, we're giving them visibility, but more importantly, we're giving them that context and guiding them in terms of how to actually remediate that.
Well, maybe just to finish off, we've got just only a couple of minutes left. Let's future scope a little. Today was a bit about what we're seeing and then what we sort of expect. Maybe starting with you, Dom, will the world abstract itself from a security perspective? Will it be application security, and then the hyperscalers will look after that layer? Will it get as clean and defined as that, or where do you think it's going to go?
I don't think it'll ever be as clean as that. The one thing that I am absolutely seeing, not just in this region but globally, is really that whole consolidation piece, particularly from a security standpoint. Ricardo was talking a little bit earlier in terms of a CNAP platform. What that ultimately means is aggregating all of the key capabilities that a customer needs to secure their multi-cloud or hybrid-based environment. We are absolutely seeing organizations looking for that tool consolidation, because at the end of the day, it's about aggregating and correlating all the information that you get out of these tools and really providing context, because without context, you ultimately have nothing. So we're definitely seeing that transition in terms of creating a seamless platform, as you would say, in terms of stitching things like identity to workload to what's happening from a posture, continuous audit, compliance, all the things that you need for that 360 continuous view of what's happening in the cloud.
Great. And maybe, Stefan, just to conclude with you, where do you see Google 5 years' time in this sort of area?
If I knew that, then I probably would not have the position that I have now. But I think to the
I'm not
point
asking
that
for stock tips or anything.
to the point that Ricardo was making, 99% of the challenges that we see customers are having, we call them customer challenges. I think, when Phil Venables joined Google Cloud, Phil Venables is our chief security officer. He came from a large bank, and he said, the first thing that I want to do when I'm at Google Cloud is I want to make sure that everybody understands that shared responsibility doesn't work, right? It needs to be shared fate. So as cloud providers, we need to do a better job in providing secure by default, secure by design. It's difficult because the whole premise of cloud is you've got self-service, you've got flexibility. How do you bring that together with security? We're working on that, but I think as cloud providers, we need to do better than just say 99% of the issues that we're seeing out there are customer issues, right? So we need to do better at that, and we will.
Which is a great point. Yeah, Nathan, did you have any
Stock tips, John?
stock pit? Yes, please. Yes.
No. Crypto
I
tips?
know. In 5 years you'll be surfing and yeah, buy Bitcoin or.
Oh, look, the thing I was just reflecting on is in terms of the future. I mean, we are seeing a push to, and I think Ricardo mentioned this as well, that, there's lots of centers of data and centers of processing now, right? So whether they are the major centers, the major clouds we do, or whether it's pushing further to the edge, I think that's something for us all to keep an eye on, and to seek solutions that help to simplify operationally there. I think moving forward, we're yet to see some of the adoption in Australia as we are overseas into that sort of 5G spectrum as well, and beyond potentially. And I think that's going to present some challenges and opportunities for us all as well into the future. So thinking about how you can consolidate the number of tools, the number of technology, I think will be vital in that sort of distributed environment.
Yeah, great. And perhaps a good segue into our next session, but we will be more connected, interconnected, and services will become more vital in terms of how we operate as a society. Having that trust in those services is going to be super essential, and we now talk about not just trust and cybersecurity, but resilience, of course, and that's going to be a really big feature going forward. But thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been great having you up.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Well, I probably don't need to introduce Sean. Many of you would have seen him starring on podcasts and writings, and certainly one of the country's well-known cyber evangelists, if you like. Sean's going to be representing the group today, the cyber threat group, well known around the world, called Unit 42. And they, are classically knife fighting, let's say, with APTs and nation states and, very sophisticated criminal groups. I always find it a little bit terrifying when I talk to Sean because even my world of cyber gets a little bit thrown off by some of the things that we're seeing coming through. But Sean, over to you. Tell us what's going to be happening.
Awesome, cool. Thanks, John. I appreciate that you bring so much joy to your life with scaring you to bejesus. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Look, in the short period of time that I've got with you, hopefully I won't scare you the way that I clearly scared John. But what I want to do is really just focus on a couple of key things. If I think about point in time where we are right now, we're at a point where we basically are seeing more and more threats, and I think that for me is a constant. And many of you probably even heard me use this stat before. I've been in security now for 22 years, and when I started in an antivirus company back in 2000, I was working for a company where we had collected 500,000 pieces of malware in our database from the previous 25 years. Fast forward today, that's probably what we receive on a daily basis. And malware today is one of many, many threats that we actually have. But if I think about all the challenges that we're trying to sort of deal with, and then add the way that our businesses are moving, to Ricardo's point, 10 months of movement is collectively what we've seen in previous 10 years of movement out to public cloud through the workloads we're actually sort of pushing out there. We're seeing a lot more. And what that basically means is the attackers are basically actively probing and prompting and checking to see what are the holes and vulnerabilities that are out there. But let me give you a couple of stats just to sort of get some context. So if I think back to 2020, 25 zero days were actually announced by Project Zero, Google's Project Zero. If you think about from 2021, it basically went up to 58. And then by June of this year, we had already seen 66. So that's just basically people poking and prodding to find out what exploits could actually be targeted and compromise particular applications. There's never really a shortage of things to do. But then when you start to add that to the world of cloud of what we have been doing as well, not only do we have to keep on sort of patching and maintaining some level of cyber hygiene in our environment, we also need to think about what is it that's actually going on in our cloud estates. The big thing that we're seeing from our Unit 42 Cloud Threat Report that we announced a couple of months back was the fact that we're seeing this over-provisioning of accounts, services, roles, users that have effectively God status, they pretty much do anything and everything in their cloud estates. And all it takes is for one person to basically be compromised, and all of a sudden they can effectively get in, rotate keys, and all of a sudden they can start to own everything that you're doing in the cloud. That is actually something that has happened many times over. If I think about some of the work that we've done from the 6,000 cases that we've responded to from our incident response group, many of them actually relate to cloud. Probably the bulk of them actually relate to cloud these days. And even though we're seeing the top two threats that we're dealing with mostly around ransomware and business email compromise, a lot of the actual instances that we're dealing with are always focused around cloud. And that usually stems from identity and access management, the over-provisioning of users and credentials and accounts, and also sometimes maintaining very weak credentials. If I think about what, we talked about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin miners love to actually use other people's cloud estates. And the way they're always going to get in, weak credentials, number one, and then start to simply say, great, I'm going to get in, I'm going to start spinning up some instances, and I'm going to start using that to basically go off and mine some Bitcoin. Happens on a regular basis. To the point that Don mentioned, how often are we actually sitting there and watching and maintaining some level of visibility to see who's doing what? You think about with lift and shift, we all just simply said, well, everything that we're doing here, we're running all these HP servers, these big massive servers that are probably running some little tiny web server. Let's just push that out to cloud. Were we actually watching it? Some people weren't. We saw cloud sprawl take place. We saw VM sprawl take place. We didn't really have that governance and eyes on screen to work out what's going on, or really maintain some level of assurance of what's happening in real time. So this is something that we always need to ensure that we've got some level of governance and we're always keeping a look at. Because if you don't know what's going on with your users, your roles, the services, the provisioning and the deprovisioning of those users, someone else will. And that someone else is actually sitting outside of your organization in the form of an adversary or adversaries. The other one that we're seeing popping up more and more is really around the ways of trying to inject themselves into the CI/CD pipeline. We've seen this more often than not. Take the example, and the best example is always SolarWinds of this one. Inserting themselves in the actual packages and basically going through and getting pushed out. In the case of SolarWinds, 18,000 customers were actually impacted due to the Orion update, or to the Orion platform that was actually out there. This can easily happen. Now, when you start thinking about, I'm borrowing bits of code from other people because my developers are actually now starting to push things out en masse, and they're really, really stretched with actually creating the code from scratch all the time, well, guess what? If we're not checking everything in those early stages, as you would have heard from one of the previous speakers, trying to see what's going on in those early stages before we actually run something, can we catch it? It's analogous to actually saying, why don't we actually start thinking about that security by design for all of our applications? Because if I buy a car, I don't drive out of the car yard and pull into a brake store, an airbag store, a seatbelt store. I've actually got all of that security built into the underlying fabric of the car or the package. So why aren't we doing that with all of our applications? Checking to see all those lines of code, all the lines of borrowed code, to see what could actually go wrong. In the CI/CD pipeline, if you want to add some extra services, it could be the difference of 1 or 2 lines of extra code. And that makes a fundamental difference where sometimes someone could actually inject something that could be of malicious intent. And if we are allowing a lot of people to get access, which we do want to do that, we want to be able to safely enable all this to happen. But we need to have some way that we are actually checking at all times what's going on. If I think about what's going on sort of over the horizon and some of those challenges, I think probably the world has realized, if they hadn't already, I think mums and dads around the world, and my parents are probably no different to that one, have actually asked me, what is an API? And API being probably one of the biggest buzz terms of late. Do you know what APIs you've got exposed? Is probably a question that I've heard many times over, or I've probably even asked that. And you need to probably start thinking about it from the different guys as well. We always talk about protecting everything that's inside my castle. We've got our cannons that are facing outside that are basically trying to prevent things from actually coming inside the organization. But the reality is the barbarians have already come inside the gates. And this is where we need to think about how is it that an attacker can actually see what our organization looks like from the outside in. And this is where using the ability where you can start to tap into that, to see what someone can actually see. Because today, all of you are probably exposing microservices or leveraging microservices, probably got some APIs that are exposed, authenticated or not, like some people. And this is where you'd want to have the ability to understand and pick that up straight away. There are people that are actively scanning the internet all the time to find out what you are or are not doing correctly or not. So always try and work out what does that snapshot view look like to your own organization. Because irrespective of what it is, whether it's sort of cloud, whether it's using multi-cloud, hybrid, everyone is going to try and work out what does your estate look like, because today we no longer have a castle, we have castles. We have a lot of them. And our data stores are basically sitting in different locations all the time, and we are leveraging different things. We're sharing a lot more information. So we need to think about how are we actually sharing those information, what's actually open, and what do I look like from the outside in? Because that's one way that we're going to be able to deal with a lot of these over-the-horizon threats that we believe is going to continue. What I've even just spoken about, these two threats around identity and access management, and even with the CI/CD pipeline, I foresee that we're probably going to continue to see a lot more of that moving forward. Because that's where the attackers are starting to push a lot more these days. Hopefully I didn't scare anyone too much.
No, you did very well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Cheers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's it's frightening, and we have seen examples already of these injections. It sort of brings us on to the next topic, actually, which is the application layer is turning out to be, the new science of joining people with, these digital technologies and digital revolutions that we're all sort of engaging with now. So we got into a very interesting conversation the other day with Stefan, and really opened my eyes, at least, up to the world of DevOps. And even in cyber now, we are struggling to keep up with the genres that are appearing. We've had network security people, and then that became network and cloud security people, and now we're having to sort of look for people that are specialists in that DevOps area but understand security. So we thought we'd ask Stefan to talk a little bit about DevOps from Google's perspective and some of the nuances behind it that you might need to think about in your own organization. Stefan. Sorry.
Thank you. All right. Maybe quick show of hands. Who has or runs or is aware of a DevOps culture or team within your company? 1, 2, 3. Cool. The great thing about DevOps is that there's probably as many definitions of DevOps as there are DevOps practitioners, right? So what I thought in the next 15 minutes that I wanted to do is two things. I want to share a little bit about what is Google doing in terms of DevOps and how have we seen that impact our security team. And when I say impact, from a security results perspective, but also from a mental perspective, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And I also want to share with you some of the findings from our DORA survey, which is an annual survey that we run. And it had some very interesting pieces of information that came out of it. As always, right, we need to kind of define what is DevOps. If you look at DevOps and you look how it's defined, really what most of the definitions mean is that it's a loosely coupled set of principles. And those principles focus on a couple of things. Practices, right, processes that you have in place, guidelines, and culture. Right? And the whole idea is that these loosely coupled set of principles help you to get operational benefits, make sure that your IT silos that exist today start working together. And within Google, we looked at it and we said, yeah, we need this. We started with this about 15 years ago, I guess. And we call it slightly different. We call it site reliability engineering. It's a type of DevOps, but it is DevOps, right? So if you want to dive a little bit deeper, these are free resources, right? Go to the sre.google books site, 3 PDFs, you can download them. Gives you more than enough reading for the entire holidays, I would say, if you finish all 3 of them. But really interesting, right? There's a whole chapter on security and culture and how it impacts. But as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about DORA It's a annual survey that Google does. We've been doing it for the last 8 years. And so far we have surveyed around 33,000 professionals with a focus on understanding how they apply DevOps in their environment and how DevOps has impacted them from a productivity perspective, from an operational perspective. And in the 2022 version of the report, we focused also on security. So there's 3 areas that we want to cover. The first one is the impact from a cultural perspective. If you look at culture and you look at DevOps SRE, what we're seeing is that environments where trust-based cultures are run are really those environments that are the most productive ones, not only from a security perspective, but also in general from a software deployment perspective. That needs to be coupled with what we call a blameless culture, right? Yes, humans make mistakes, and those mistakes will keep happening, but it is the way as an organization you deal with those mistakes and how you treat your employees around that, that's going to make the difference, and we'll look a little bit into that. From a technical perspective, what we got out of the report, and as Sean was saying before as well, and Ricardo alluded to this as well, CI/CD is becoming more and more the integration part for a lot of security tooling, right? We talked a little bit about Google Cloud Run at some point, but as we look at our partner solutions, like for example from Palo Alto, we can see that tying them into a CI/CD pipeline is really what is going to give you some operational benefits from a security perspective. And then from a process perspective, the way we do incremental changes is going to be fundamental. But let's dive a little bit deeper into this. So the DORA survey categorizes the participants in 4 areas, right? So you go from a low performer to a medium performer to an elite performer. And what we see as we surveyed them, or what we saw as we surveyed them, is that when teams start looking and focusing on capabilities, such as, for example, continuous testing or cloud infrastructure, not only from an operational perspective, but also from a security perspective, they got a lot of advantages. Now, I put cloud in there and you think, oh, well, obviously Google Cloud, but cloud doesn't necessarily have to be a place, right? When we talk about cloud and cloud infrastructure, if you are able to provide an infrastructure that gives you reliability and elasticity, and you can do that on a global scale with a global network, that's fine, right? Then you have a cloud infrastructure. But those are things that are important, and as you then mature, right, adding capabilities such as continuous integration and continuous delivery, where you start pushing out software and solutions in a continuous way, are going to dramatically impact your outcomes. We talked a little bit about architecture. Making the right architectural decisions is going to be key, right? Whether you should be moving from a monolithic application, right, or multiple monolithic applications to a microservice environment is going to decide how you're going to implement your security controls. And as you then mature more and you get to the high and to the elite performers, what's interesting is that the biggest impact is not going to be your technical decisions. The biggest impact is going to be the cultural decisions that you're going to make, right? What we are seeing is for those teams that are deploying DevOps and that are embracing DevOps, at some point in time, technology is not longer going to be the differentiator. What's going to be the differentiator is the way they're going to push that culture of DevOps through the organization. I mentioned a learning culture here, making sure that you put in place the right environments for people to go and learn, to skill themselves, but also give them a blameless environment, right? Making sure that learning is also an ability to fail. Fail safe, right? Not getting blamed, and then learn out of that experience. And then last but not least, those environments that have a focus on performance, like or that are applying the Westrum organizational code. Who's familiar with Westrum? Because I put this up and not a lot. Westrum, Dr. Westrum. So Dr. Westrum is a scientist that did some study around the impact of culture in environments where, for example, aviation, where if something goes wrong, people die, right? Whether you're in healthcare, but organizations where impact of something going wrong can be very devastating. So he did some work around that, and again, the outcome was really
those organizations that are blameless and those organizations that focus on outcomes are really the ones that are going to be differentiating. So now that's all great, and what has that to do with security? As you are a better performer, here is what you get as an outcome from those things, right? From a software deployment perspective, you deploy way faster. And this is not a typo, right? 6,570 times faster than the ones that not do it. That's not a typo. That's effectively what we're seeing out of the study, right? The change failure rate is 3 times lower. And change can also be change because we've introduced something wrong from a security perspective, right? But related to security, here's the interesting part. Those that are embracing DevOps have 50% less time, need 50% less time fixing security issues compared to low performance, right? So like we were saying before, if you shift your security as much as possible left in that CI/CD pipeline, you're going to have benefits from a security outcome perspective. Now that's technology. If we look at what the mental impact is, teams that focus on establishing security practices are significantly more likely to recommend their teams to others, right? So the whole retention capability around security teams is really important. So having an environment where, again, culture becomes really important, you provide a safe environment, is going to be key. And last but not least, the impact on burnout. 140% less odds of having high levels of burnouts than teams that have lower levels of security practice. Now, these are significant numbers, and knowing what's happening in our industry with regards to mental health, these are really key things that we need to start looking at. Now, culture has a definition, right? A lot of people go like, hey, culture, is this something I can buy? Is this something that I can do? Yes. At Google about, I think, 2015, we looked at the problem, and Google is a data-driven company. Not only do we like your data, we also like our data. So we look at the data internally, and we try to define what does a good team look like? When do people feel comfortable within a team, right? And at Google, it's not only free food and ping pong, right? That's what you get if there is a good culture, right? But really, culture is all about creating the right environments. So we looked at it, and these are the 5 things that came out of it, right? So the first one is psychological safety. As I mentioned before, we need our teams to be able to take risks without feeling insecure when they do so, right? You need to give people an environment where they can safely fail if they do. Dependability, making sure that everybody can count on each other within a team and across teams, right? And that's what DevOps is all about. It's about making sure that the security team can count on the developer team, and the developer team can count on the operational team. Make sure that there is structure and clarity. The biggest issue, or one of the biggest factors for burnout, is people that have no clarity in what the goal is that the company wants them to do. They don't have clarity of what their manager or their teammates want them to do. Right? So make sure there is structure, there is clarity, and give people meaning. Right? We're in the cybersecurity world, right? There's a lot of good things that we do. So have a meaning and give people meaning. Let them know that what they're doing is important, and make sure that they feel that what they're doing is important. And make sure that people know that they matter and that what they do has an impact. Now, on the my right-hand side of the slide, you can see the expectations that a lot of organizations have when they think we're going to change culture, right? Yeah, we're going to have some early adapters, and we're going to have some innovators, and there's a little chasm, and then off we go, and everybody's happy, and we start doing these things. In reality, what we're seeing is that, yes, there's early adapters, but the chasm is really long, right? So it is not something that you do overnight. So how do we do it at Google, or how have we done it at Google? There's a lot of text on the slide. Don't worry too much on it. 2 things that I want you to take away. First of all, we made sure that there is a process for executing organizational change, right? And we did that by making sure that we can set goals and that everybody within the team was enabled to do experimentation around it. And within Google, we often use what we call OKRs, or objectives and key results. Now, these objectives are very ambitious and make people feel uncomfortable, right? But that's what they are. They are stretch goals and they are ambitious. But what we really measure are the key results that people need to achieve to get towards that ambition. And we put that on a scale of 1 to 10, and then they become public, so everybody within the organization exactly knows what the objectives are that the team wants to aspire. And the sweet spot for those OKR grades is around 60 to 70%, right? So we never get to 100%. If you get to 100%, that just means that we need to tune it, and the objective is not ambitious enough. Right? So that's one thing. OKRs, there's a couple of other that you can use, but OKRs are usually what is used within Google. And then the second one is, as you go through all this, make sure that the mechanisms that you have are there to make sure that everybody can understand and learn from the good things that you're doing within the organization. Now, from a technology perspective, Sean talked about it, Ricardo talked about it. If we look at cloud, if we look at architecture, this is a little bit of a timeline on how Google built their current architecture, right? And started in 2003 and all the way 2019, 2021 to today. This is kind of what a modern architecture evolves to, right? And containers and monolithic applications are no longer the case, but you get the point. You have an architectural shift that DevOps needs to look at. But a lot of customers ask us, hey, how can we get that run that you had starting in 2000 and something all the way to now? How can we do that today? Right? And again, you can build that yourself if you want to. Absolutely. There's a whole set of solutions out there. But we also believe that there's a lot of customers that don't want to run that themselves. And one of the questions we had during the panel was, what can you do better and what are customers looking for at cloud? Now, this is one of the examples that customers are looking for. Right? We call it Software Delivery Shield, but effectively is a fully managed CI/CD pipeline that allows customers all the way from assured open source software. Ricardo was mentioning, right? How can you as a customer make sure that the software that you download, the open source packages, that they are effectively secure, right? Assured open source software provides you that. Why do you need that, Stefan? Well, a couple of years ago, right, if you would find, well, even today, if you would find a USB key on the floor, would you plug it into your laptop to see what it is? No, you probably wouldn't, right? But you would be astounded how many people still download open source packages from nilly-willy on the internet, right? So don't do that. So if you want to do that, if you want to build that yourself, you can. If you want a fully managed environment, you can get that on Google Cloud, all the way from cloud build to deploying it yourself all the way onto your Kubernetes environment. Now, what's great about it, and that's really the last remark that I want to make, what's great about it is that it's fully open, right? You can see the security gates in there, like there's container analysis, there is statistic analysis, there is a runtime analysis. These are built in such a way that we can plug solutions like Palo Alto Prisma into that. Right? We provide you the choice of connecting into whatever security solution you want. And with that, that was it for me. Thank you.
Really interesting to sort of see that. And our businesses going forward. When you're in the community, the security community, the IT community, let's say part of the matrix, you often forget that there's a journey that's going on. And I went to a presentation a couple of weeks ago, a very technical one, and Anders came up, and I had no idea what it was, although I think I recognized you from a TED Talk somewhere in the distant past. And I was telling Anders before, I sort of got sucked into this journey that you took us all on, that we've sort of been through, that I think, you know, at least I personally had sort of forgotten that we were going through. Anders, you're a TED talker, you're an author, you're an advisor to many large big companies, you've got your own consulting organization, and you've probably chosen one of the hardest topics, being a futurist, given how quickly and dynamically the world is changing. But thank you for coming, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say today.
G'day. Can you all make sense of my slightly weird Swedish Australian accent, first of all? Okay, there's a little bit of hesitation so far. Okay. First of all, I should just say, as a Swede, and again, sadly we didn't make the World Cup either, but to my adopted nation of Australia, I say well done for beating the New Zealand of Scandinavia this morning. I think there's a beautiful German word we have adopted into the English language, which is Schadenfreude, or Schadenfreude, maybe in Aussie. So new term for you, which is when you're happy in someone else's misery. So there you go. There's no competition between Swedes and Danes, as you clearly notice. Great to be here. It feels like I'm virtually in an episode of Black Mirror. Does anyone else feel like that? Who doesn't know what I'm talking about? All right, fantastic, a few of you. All right, fantastic. So if my Swedish Australian accent is making some kind of sense for the introverts, just nod. Yeah, okay, for the extroverts, don't hold back. All right, fantastic, we're all good. And fantastic, and the slides are working as well. All right, great to be with you all here today. I mean, we frequently hear this idea that, you know, in the last 24 months, we've seen 10 years worth of digital disruption or even digital transformation compressed into these 2 last years. But, you know, even if we scan the horizon, you know, sort of back gazing for the last 5 years, it's not like we were sitting still even before the pandemic, when technology became our only lifeline. I mean, who struggles a little bit with some of this terminology, whether it's cryptocurrencies, digital disruption, climate change, buy now, pay later, metaverse, you know, the hacking of FTX or a variety of different exchanges. Does anyone just feel like they want to retire before you have to learn any of this new shit? Okay, all right, there's a few. The good news is, if we just retire today, the robots can never ever steal our jobs. So we'll all be fine. But clearly, the rate of change has never ever been this fast, and will never ever be this slow again. So hopefully, you're happy they invited an inspirational speaker to bring you up to drinks here today. All right. Now, as a futurist, I also tend to be a little bit of a traditionalist, and dare I say, maybe even a little bit of a humanist. And while I do believe that we are migrating into a very digital society, a digital ether, a metaverse, if you wish, we're also seeing that our hearts are enduringly emotional and analog, and we're enjoying being out there in the physical world. A physical world that, of course, now has a digital layer to it. And I do believe that even in our rush towards digital transformation, we have a bit of a cyber debt, because we were all in a rush to digitize really, really, really fast. But we have a cyber debt, and there are some things we need to secure. I believe that fundamentally today, we cannot claim to be customer-centric no matter what industry you're in without being data-centric. But we also cannot be customer-centric without being security-centric. I also believe that one of the critical technologies to making the world a more sustainable place with a view to 2030 rather than net zero 2050 is, of course, digital technologies. And if we see the billions of lines of code in an EV being hacked, we could actually have some counterfactual counter-innovation where people go, I'm going to go back to the old school Tarago. I believe that's a vehicle here in Australia. Okay, fantastic. Instead of adopting the latest technologies. But we do need these digital technologies to actually make the world a sustainable place. But before we go there, and we link up the marriage of green and digital together, I just want to take you on a bit of a historical journey back to the past for a moment in time and explore why on earth a futurist would also be a little bit of a traditionalist, and take you back to my native city of Stockholm, Sweden. Just for a little moment in time, we might just bring back the A of the AV there for just a moment in time, Maestro. To this little urban vista here, can we just bring down the volume? To this little urban vista where things truly were a little bit quieter, things were moving a little bit more slowly, things were kind of either this or that, black or white. very sort of Viking-esque, or as we call him here, George Johansson. As the second oldest son on the family farm, he had few inheritance rights, and as a result, he had to make his own sort of entrepreneurial future in the cityscape of Stockholm. And his commercial opportunity was to dress the increasingly sophisticated Swedish gentleman of that era a few years before the pandemic of the time, the Spanish flu, impacted Stockholm, Sydney, and other places around the world. And his business model, after completing a retail apprenticeship for nearly 6 years, was to invest his venture capital into this little menswear haberdashery. A time before YouTube, before Instagram, before cryptocurrencies, before Zoom and other technologies, when looking into a camera was very much of a technological novelty. And in a cap nod to his agrarian roots, as he became a man of entrepreneurship, he changed his surname from Johansson to the man from the southern farm, or in Swedish, Georg Sarman. He's my great-grandfather, and as you can tell, he must have been a bit of a futurist because he's got a great haircut, a cool little pocket square. And you can also see that we share some genealogical traits with North Korean dictators. He invested in the latest technology of that era, which was the analog neon sign, to win the then analog hearts and the then analog minds of yesteryear's customers. But for my mother, Birgitta, who looks pretty amazing for a 106-year-old, as you can tell, we moisturize in our family, and she still dresses me every day of the week, and apparently being Harry High Pants is coming back on trend. But for her, in an era of some of these changes that you've seen, these exponential changes, of course, even pre-pandemic, the customer would walk into the store, spend time with mum over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. She would tell them about the supply chains and the family businesses around the world that she sources her organic cottons from, etc. She'd tell them a story about that, and then incentivize with a 5% discount via amazon.com/fashion to contribute to their real-time comparative pricing cloud. The customer would say, hey, we'll think about it, and you know they're not going to think about it. They would then exit the store to the sound of a very lonely little bell and then order the item on Mr. Porter or amazon.com/fashion instead, showcasing the lack of sustainability on my mum's fundamentally physical and analog business model. Now, my mum has her own approach to big data gathering, which is pen and paper, and she measures her SKUs like this, all right? Now, can you imagine how annoying it must be to have a son who's a futurist, who goes and meddles in family business affairs, and who asks the question, why on earth would we do it this way? But the way my mum runs this business in a very analog fashion is fundamentally perfectly prepared for a world that simply no longer exists. You can tell that I'm the favorite son and child in our family. Now, you can sense a bit of intergenerational tension, no doubt, but I wrote a little love letter to my mum a few years ago called Digilog, How to Win the Digital Minds and the Analog Hearts of Tomorrow's Customers, where I argue to mum, it's not necessarily the case that you have to throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. But as brands today, we do need to excel in the digital future, but also bring with it our brand history, our brand heritage, our DNA, and scale our expertise and our value. And maybe tell stories in a digitally scalable fashion, even scale our own empathy. Now, this has the ears of Fortune 500 clients of ours at Westpac that credits the ideas in this book. We then move from number 4 to number 1 in terms of retail banking customer satisfaction. Sadly for me, the person I wrote this little love letter for has not yet read the love letter. Who just feels like you're part of a family therapy session so far? All right, fantastic. Sadly, you never become a prophet in your own hometown, and during the pandemic, despite my best attempts to help mum digitally diversified, during the first year of the pandemic, my parents at the tender ages of 70 and 67 filed for bankruptcy. 104 years worth of history lost, the oldest menswear haberdashery in Stockholm just lost. It is my biggest failure as a futurist, failing to get mum to tune in to Future Signal. Now, it'd be easy to run all sorts of post-mortems. My mum loves to point the finger at the pandemic. She says that's what killed our business. But I think we all know the real reason was that she wasn't digitally diversified, right? Sadly, she won't be able to participate in this next wave of the sustainable economy. Now, I'm always a firm believer that it's better to do a pre-mortem than a post-mortem. And the question I want you to bear in your minds, to let marinate in the back of your minds throughout our session and our time here today, is to do a little bit of a thought experiment. Why would we do a pre-mortem? Because you can actually affect the future outcome as opposed to a post-mortem. So imagine for a moment that it's 2030. Let's step out into the future and looking back towards now, your company went belly up. What were the trends that you, or maybe your stakeholders, just missed? What were the future signals that you deliberately chose to ignore? And what were the investment decisions, either in yourself or in the right technologies, that you just delayed and delayed that led to that demise? And instead, what change will you make today to prevent that from happening? When I think about the future, and I think about the future of digital transformation, the cyber debt that we have, and securitizing a sustainable future, I look at business models around the world where clearly they understand that there's a sweet spot between green and digital, like at the Formula E, where we work with the Envision racing team in London recently. They understand that when you align yourself and you anchor yourself to future trends like digital transformation, like the future of racing, and a net zero approach to racing that's a little bit different from a diesel fuel or a petrol fueled Formula One, for example, you're actually winning the hearts and minds of tomorrow's conscious consumers. And we'll come back to this concept throughout our session here today. Every business model, every business today is getting digitally hacked. Now, if I was to ask, whether it's during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, or even post-pandemic, who in your organization led your digital transformation? Quick poll. Was it your CEO? Your CTO? Your CIO? Maybe your CISO? Or was it something fundamentally different? Was it COVID-19 that presented us with a burning platform for transformation where we had to go and work from anywhere, right? Where we had to secure a new way of working, right? Now you've probably seen this meme around the internets somewhere, right? But the question is, beyond just this burning platform of digital transformation, who's going to lead the strategic storytelling that's going to enable us to keep digitally transforming? Because that digital transformation is key to a sustainable world. We'll see that many of the technologies that you drive, be it cloud, going off or on-premise to the cloud, be it leapfrogging technologies like at Philips, where they're deploying cloud and new technologies to actually leapfrog certain phases of development to make certain technologies defunct, right? Again, saving in the circular economy, that the types of technologies you secure are actually key to a sustainable future. Now, humans don't like shifting from an analog world to a digital world, or even from a left lane to a right lane, from a linear economy to a circular economy. But just to explore this idea that we don't really like change, and to illustrate that, in 1967, the Swedish government decided we were going to shift from left lane driving to right lane driving. The big change management mantra of that era was just smile. We're all just new at this. Isn't that a wonderful change management mantra? Right? When you launch zero trust or two-factor authentication, just smile, we're all just new at this. When you talk to your mobile sales teams, etc., right? You can see that it was every ambulance chasing lawyers Disneyland. Now let's compare and contrast that to a world of EVs, of sensorily aware infrastructure. Imagine for a moment sending your kids, your nieces, your nephews, maybe even your elderly grandparents confidently in their wheelchairs on their way to the retirement village across this little intersection. I'm just feeling that the cumulative heartbeats per minute here is just slightly escalated and elevated in the audience. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, over the next 10 years, we'll be able to save 1.1 million human lives courtesy of sensorily aware vehicles. When I returned from my most recent international holiday unscathed from Liguria, Italy, I personally welcome the days when humans are no longer behind the wheels, at least in Italy. And when I share this with our clients at Bharti Airtel in Mumbai, they go, this is nothing new, this is what it looks like in Mumbai every day of the week. Plus we have semi-autonomous cows on those streets as well. My mum always says, Anders, the digital world feels sort of digitally dehumanized, but I would argue that in fact, in the digital world, we can reduce the inhumane consequences of human error. And that what we've seen through the pandemic is that the most human touch in any customer journey has now become the digital contactless touch. Whether it's click and collect, whether it's contactless delivery, or even paying, right, via NFC, for example. This is the most human touch in any customer journey today. Now, apologies to anyone who has family, friends, or loved ones impacted by these two particular events. I do apologize for raising them here today, although I think the second example is a really heartening example of what can happen when we code for humanity. The truck on your left, ladies and gentlemen, is the same make and model that sadly, tragically, on Bastille Day in 2016 was hijacked by a terrorist who then drove that dumb truck for 1.6 kilometers down the Esplanade, and in the process taking 92 lives, 482 people injured in that event, many families suffering the tragic loss of loved ones, many more suffering from PTSD to this day. The truck on your right was built after a 2012 EU directive that stated that every truck on the roads of the EU built after 2012 had to be part of the Internet of Things, had to be equipped with ABS, or advanced braking system, and sensors. Now maybe foolishly, or maybe luckily for humanity, that was the smart truck that was hijacked by a terrorist in the same year in Berlin at the Berlin Christmas market attack. And not after 1.6 kilometers, but with his foot still on the accelerator, after only 70 meters, the truck shut down the terrorist, reducing the inhumane consequences of human error through automation. Less than 10% of people comparative to NIST were impacted in that attack. We can all code for more humane outcomes. What you guys do is clearly critical. Securing physical assets to a more sustainable, a more humanitarian world. Now, if you're a real cynic, you could also say that in the future ISIS won't send in humans, they'll just send in the code, which is again why you guys are so critical as cyber defenders. Now, we know at our clients at Philips that they believe that the most human way of running medicine is through the digital interface. But they also know that technologies enable a more humane future where they can digitally scale the humanity of doctors through telemedicine, but that it's also saving on energy. So for example, in their Lumify mobile ultrasound machine, they are skipping and leapfrogging technologies so that nurses and medical professionals don't necessarily need big screens. It just taps into this little device, their iOS or their Android, technologies they already have, right? And Philips adopting the circular economy, they're realizing that they can have 40 to 70x decrease in carbon emissions by replacing physical visits with telemedicine appointments. They're realizing today that it can have up to 93% in energy savings and 75% less server requirements. They're realizing 30 to 90% less energy use by utilizing more intelligent and efficient usage of software. Green and digital actually work hand in hand. It's a marriage made in heaven. But if we continue having cyber attacks on hospitals, where certain hospitals are now going after black hat hackers and trying to get them convicted of cyber homicide, we're going to see counter innovation. People going back to pen and paper, and we're not going to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals if we go back to doing things the way we used to in the good old days. Sustainability and digital working together. We also know that the Internet of Things is changing brand conversations. Who here gets a little bit nervous when your iPhone or your Oppo or your Samsung device starts running on low battery? Sorry for raising all these traumatic experiences for all of you here today. Who just had to test your phone there? Some of you are already plugged in towards the back, all right? Okay. Now, one of the biggest challenges towards EV adoption in Australia has been our sense of this range anxiety. Where's the next supercharger station, right? Now, imagine being a owner or a co-financier with a bank. You're an owner of a Tesla and you're fleeing from Hurricane Irma a couple of hurricane seasons ago. With your most beloved belongings, your most beloved family members, you're giving yourself a little clap on the shoulder for being an early adopter of new technologies. As you're fleeing down the highway, you're overtaking all the petrol-based vehicles around you, and then all of a sudden you see your Tesla battery starting to run on low as Hurricane Irma chases you and gets closer to you. What kind of passive-aggressive glances do you think you're getting from the passenger seat next to you, right? Until all of a sudden, across your dashboard comes a little message from Elon Musk who goes, "Fret not, human, we've just remotely upgraded your battery via the cloud so you can safely get out of harm's way." What do you think your relationship to that previously cold piece of technology has now become? What's your brand loyalty and brand connection, true story by the way, to that cold piece of technology? That technology has now become anthropomorphized. And it's moving us in a real way from a brand voice that used to be about brands screaming to consumers what they stood for and hoping somebody accepted it. Through social media, that moved from a monologue to a dialogue. Now it's a trialogue between the brand, the consumer, and the object. Be that your smart vehicle or be that your smart home. It's changing our expectations on predictive maintenance and on brands solving problems for us before they even occur. But of course, as humans, do we contribute our best automation, our best AI, our best machine learning, our best IoT ideas inside of our cultures? The research from the University of California at Berkeley asked people in organizations, if you had a great automation or innovation idea, and you would have to do different work as a result of such technology being implemented, would you actually speak such idea to your team members? 37% of people said yes. Then they asked, if you believed you would be able to do better work as a result of such technology being implemented, magically, 87% of people said they would. In your own teams, in your own meetings, in your own ambitions to have a seat at the table, are you part of thinking I might have to do different work as a result of such technology being implemented? Or is it better? What is it amongst your staff? This has real implications, not only on your innovations, but of course also on people, planet, and profit. At UPS, a delivery company that you'd all know in the United States, where they drive on the correct side of the road, a few years ago, somebody in a meeting just like this one here today said, "I've just got a hunch. Maybe we should stop turning left." In Australia, read right. Okay, this is the mental challenge for this afternoon. All right. Why? Because we're sitting in oncoming traffic for too long, we're wasting precious fossil fuels, and we're delivering fewer parcels as a result. Why don't we just test not turning left? They ran small experiments, fitted RFID and GPS tags onto their vehicles to see whether this actually made sense. Across the organization now, virtually never do they turn left. But this is about people, planet, and profit for them. More packages delivered annually to their customers, less carbon dioxide, and less fuel used. Imagine what happens when they use renewable energy. Now, if you think I'm sprinkling sort of digital fairy dust onto the sustainability question here, I am aware that if we look at the internet and the carbon emissions of the internet, yes, and if it was a country, we would be the 5th largest emitter on the planet. In fact, the carbon emissions from the internet is 16 times more than Belgium as a country. We know Bitcoin alone is responsible for around 22 million tons of CO2 emissions every year, and the carbon footprint of the internet is on par with the international airline industry. So this is not a panacea necessarily, but you'd also say that we're enabling transformation and sustainability on behalf of other countries and, of course, organizations as well. I also believe that there are some threats out there, to go back to this idea of Black Mirror. So let me just tune you into what can happen when certain AIs and MLs get weaponized. Here's a quick example. Might just get some...
Customer pilots directed almost 3,000 precision strikes last year. We're super proud. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger. Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that?
So there's a sense today that content, digital content, some people would say digital nutrition, is chemistry wrapped in story. All the organizations that you represent provide digital marketing, digital content, chemistry wrapped in narrative. Yes, you have the barbarians, as we've heard about, but there's a huge, huge risk in adopting digital communications. Any piece of content has the ability to trigger brain chemistry. Who feels a bit affected by that little science fiction-y video? Right? Now, our reactions to new technologies is a tricky one. The science fiction author Douglas Adams once said, when it comes to our reactions towards new technologies, he's come up with a set of rules. Anything that's in the world when you're born is natural and normal and ordinary. It's just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything invented between the ages of 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary. You can probably get a career in it, like a TikTok analyst. Anything invented after the age of 35 is against the natural order of things. Does anyone feel like this? We're all on a slippery slope, right? Now, we know this idea that the fundamental battle lines are moving. Back in 2013, the then Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, announced plans for a distinguished warfare medal, essentially meant to recognize drone easy to say if you're Swedish, drone pilots and cyber defenders. How do you think that went down with real analog veterans? Not real good. Now, this proposal got killed very, very quickly. All right. The question is, 10 years later, looking at the fact that nowadays the code gets sent in first, and then maybe there's physical warfare. We see it certainly in Ukraine and on the battle lines in Eastern Europe today. But yes, the battle lines have moved. And we also know that in this world, content is chemistry wrapped in narrative. There's an organization called ABC Labs that advocates for a better digital nutrition. Now, we hear about the social dilemma, etc., and digital addictions, but they are actually now consulting with and providing digital nutrition for American soldiers returning from war zones or from virtual war zones, where they have a diet of meditation and other types of apps in their virtual ecosystems to boost serotonin levels, to provide calm, energy, focus, or motivation through a better digital nutrition in terms of the content they consume. Content being chemistry wrapped in narrative. This is something we need to think about as we tell a news story to the world about what our organizations do. Because whatever story you tell can trigger brain chemistry in the participant or whoever consumes it. Like this, for example.
America.
We got audio on this one.
America. You blame me for interfering with your democracy, but I don't have to. You are doing it to yourselves. Polling stations are closing. You don't know who to trust. You are divided. There are strings we can pull, but we don't have to. You are pulling them for us.
Who didn't know that Vladimir Putin spoke English so well? Right? This is synthetic media. What happens when somebody does this to a message from your CEO, who hacks their lip movement, their voice, because they featured on too many podcasts, and ML is able to learn and do this? An announcement about a cyber attack that might have happened. What do you think might happen to your share price, even if there was no cyber attack? Content is chemistry wrapped in narrative, and it can have disastrous results. So this is something we need to secure as well. Why? Because even the leading organizations in the world get the most fundamentally basic things wrong sometimes, by sometimes taking the human out of the loop. When Apple, as a fintech player, launched a new credit card, it was all based on artificial intelligence. In a big ceremony, they gave a new credit card to Steve Wozniak and his wife. They have the exact same FICO scores. They share all their financial metrics. His credit limit, 10 times hers. Why? Because the AI was fundamentally backward looking and said that females are a greater credit risk. How do you think this went down when Steve Wozniak and his wife tweeted about it? Do you think it was a successful launch? When the founder of Apple, right, gets 10 times the credit limit. We have to retain a human in the loop when we innovate forward. I believe that story is data with a soul, and that the only way for us to truly be customer-centric is to be data-centric. A great example of this is what they do at Netflix, where even the creative and the story and the narrative gets informed by data. Has anyone here watched Black Mirror? Yeah, fantastic, a few of you. Your homework tonight is to watch Bandersnatch. In that episode, for every 2 minutes or so, you get to decide whether the protagonist is going to turn left or right, whether he or she will jaywalk or not, whether they should eat the blue pill, the red pill, or maybe both the pills. And you get to shape a variety of different future alternative scenarios. It's a very engaging type of show. Be careful with how many drinks you have before you engage in it. It's very immersive. Content is chemistry wrapped in narrative. What do you think Netflix is doing in the meantime? Data-based approach to their creative future storytelling to make sure that they're winning both digital minds as well as analog hearts. Which brings us to this idea that the procurement officer and the customer of the future today is incredibly conscious. They're conscious around a whole ecology of factors. They're eco-conscious, they're data-conscious, science-conscious, story-conscious, provenance-conscious, future-conscious, health-conscious. And I'm going to cover just a few of these and why they matter in your ecosystem moving forward. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are a huge creativity catalyst. Creativity within planetary constraints. Not only do they trigger new business models like the little Australian brand Who Gives a Crap that provides recycled toilet paper and not in that fashion, they are firmly focused on clean water and sanitation, goal number 6. As a startup, they were one of the biggest corporate philanthropists in 2020 because they give away 50% of their profits towards building toilets and sanitation projects in the developing world, firmly embedding this UN Sustainable Development Goal into their brand DNA. Now, why is this important? Because supply chain is now the story that's going to win hearts and minds. Even whether you're customer facing, consumer facing, or B2B facing, even procurement officers are now procuring in a conscious fashion, in a purposeful fashion. I recently sat down with Nikki Sparshot, the CEO of Unilever Australia and New Zealand, who's turned Australia, New Zealand, Unilever into a certified B Corp, meaning that they meet the highest levels of corporate social responsibility for social and environmental factors. Just for one brand in their family, for T2, she had to work with 400 different suppliers around the world to either get rid of them or upskill them to ensure that no matter where they are in the world, India, Sri Lanka, or for example in Venezuela, that they change the way they run their businesses. We cannot do supply chain by ourselves, right? It is an ecosystem of impact. And what Nikki Sparshot says is that just because you're purpose-driven doesn't mean you're profit-deprived. And what they're finding at Unilever is that the more purposeful brands, the most purpose-driven brands, are their most profitable brands. We used to think of these two things as extrinsically and mutually exclusive. But I actually argue that sustainability and profitability go hand in hand today. According to Raconteur's research, 55% of global consumers now want to know, and they choose their products with a traceable and transparent origin. Now, we've all heard this like farm to table, beautiful story when we sit down and eat Daisy the cow or Wagyu. But like, is it true? And how do we verify it? Well, today we verify it on the blockchain. Today you can scan a barcode to see whether Daisy is who she says she is. Sorry to all the vegans in the room here today, right? But equally, De Beers today on the blockchain is verifying that the diamonds you're buying for your partners is from conflict-free mines. Again, we're securitizing and securing the future of storytelling and brand through our digital innovations. Now, what would happen if somebody hacked that chain, right? What would be the impact for De Beers? You want to know that the diamonds you buy actually come from a mine that you respect and that is conflict-free. But even in a B2B context at our clients at SAP, Ariba, procurement with purpose, through the Ariba network, we see $3 trillion of commerce transacted every year. Now they've tapped into via an open API with GiveWith, which provides social impact projects as a percentage of every deal, seamlessly integrated into the ecosystem so that when you procure, not only do you get a stamp that the supply chain you're dealing with, the partners you deal with, is an ecosystem of impact, but you can also give a proportion of every deal to a social impact cause. According to SAP, they show that having a positive social or societal influence is nearly twice as important than other factors. 68% of customers would be more favorable to a brand if they knew it was adhering to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This builds brand loyalty, but we also need a digital verification that the stories we tell are true, both B2B and B2C. This new customer is extremely data-centric, right? And this is important. The ABS and the Australian Productivity Commission a few years ago did some research in the context of Aussie's disposable income, and they asked the question, when you say you spend $100 on something, what did you actually spend audited? Who's got some family members you want to send along to this piece of research, right? Now, when Aussie said we spent $100 at the fuel gauge last month, we were fairly accurate, $104 pre-inflation at least. Comes out in the wash depending on who's the CFO at home. But it gets more worrying. When we say we spent $100 at IKEA, the world's largest contributor to the high international divorce rate, I can say that because I'm Swedish, the real audited amount was $132. And when we say, hey, Hun spent $100 at the pokies last night, never have your conferences near a casino, ladies and gentlemen, the real audited amount was $735. Clearly, when us humans listen to our gut feel in the context of disposable income and ones and zeros, we suck, is the technical term. So let's compare that to a world where we're all digitally quantified. A few years ago, I ran the New York Marathon spontaneously with 16 hours preparation. Don't try this at home, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I always kind of knew that the last 39.5 kilometers or so were going to suck. But at least to my aid, not only the 2 beers in Brooklyn to do my carb loading and my Dutch courage building ahead of the race, but I was aided with a little piece of digital hardware and software. with Nike Plus as well as the iPhone. I could tell the couple of times I slowed down to just hide from the world in the toilets, or when I sped up to go through more dangerous neighborhoods. And now I know that for somebody like me who used to run in ACES, Nike knows that for every breath I take, for every step I make, I know and they know that they're watching me. Meaning they can personally bespoke tailor a portfolio of clothing and hardware. They know for somebody like me who launches into their digital software 5 times, I'm more likely to buy which product or which hardware because of the software. Now, if I ever did want to race again and overtake my competition sooner than at the halfway mark, I could actually prepare properly next time around. We are living our lives by digital digits today, and the new conscious consumer and the conscious procurement officer today is incredibly data centric. But they are also story conscious. And here the story is again about green and digital coming together. Now, if we think back to the 1990s and this old school Radio Shack ad, maybe a JB Hi-Fi ad here in Australia, and you think about all these different pieces of hardware, be it the fax machine, the Sony Walkman, the camcorder, the VCR, the TV system, the computer system, the services and functionalities of all of those different pieces of hardware, physical hardware, all consuming virgin planetary resources, the functionalities and services are all in this little device today. A device that's largely part of the circular economy of repurposing, recycling, because today we bring back the cobalt, the lithium, and the gold to Apple, turning in 2018 Apple to one of the largest gold miners in the world. Why? Because we bring it back to them. And then even in a planned obsolescence business model, they repurpose it for the next model, meaning that we can buy this stuff with a clear conscience. We are now seeing through great digital innovations a decoupling between productivity and treading more harshly on the land. We are in fact today seeing that productivity keeps going up, but with lower uses of virgin planetary resources, like in the United States, for example. We are decoupling from planetary constraints, and Apple, in this instance, gets its productivity and profitability by treading more lightly on the planet. The two are not mutually exclusive, but rather mutually reinforceable. Pandemics have tended to be periods when we've unleashed creativity, innovation, and they've emerged in new eras of humanism, art, and scientific thought. The Black Plague at the time, as tragic as it was, laid the foundations with, sadly, 50% of Florence's population perishing. It led to a new era of innovation, creativity, and humanism, artworks that we still mesmerize at to this day. Da Vinci's, the Botticelli's, the Machiavelli's, all flourishing because of this. This is known as the Medici effect. An author, good friend of mine, Franz Johansson from Harvard, talks about innovation intersections. And that the reason in his book, The Medici Effect, why Florence became a hotbed of innovation and creativity and humanism was that you had finance, the Medici banking family, funding schools where divergent thinkers and people from different backgrounds from around the world came together. STEM-based thinkers with human-centric ideas. Innovators, emotional intelligence coming together with STEM-based thinkers, for example. We know that what we have to do in organizations to truly excel innovation today is to build diverse teams that are truly inclusive. The research from BCG shows that the more divergent and diverse your teams are, the more innovation revenue you've created in the last 3 years compared to your more homogeneous peers and competitors. So this is not just doing diversity for diversity's sake. Driving innovation happens when you build D&I into your ethos and your ecosystem, ladies and gentlemen. So to bring this all together, I believe that the future is not about zero trust necessarily, or it is about zero trust technologies, but it's about building trust with our customers, about a new sustainable brand story, one that's truly digitally transformed. Now, what's the definition of trust? The best definition of trust I've come across is from my friend Rachel Botsman at the University of Oxford Said School of Business, who says that trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. A confident relationship with the unknown. And how do humans get there? We get there through story. If my 5-year-old son is afraid of something, the way I get him to suspend his disbelief is by telling a story. If I tell him about a story about Star Wars, for example, to explain what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, he understands what's happening, right? And when we sell future technologies, be they autonomous cars or digital currencies, somebody had to tell us a story to help us suspend our disbelief and build a confident relationship with the unknown. Even petrol guzzling or diesel guzzling brands, one of our clients, Jaguar Land Rover, are now participating in the Formula E, and they're seeing direct benefits. By participating in a fast-moving field that's slightly different from consumer auto vehicles, they are now seeing the technologies from the racetrack being directly utilized in the I-Pace, making its electric range 20 kilometers faster. And we're seeing brands teaming up with Formula E today. Why? Contributing to sponsorship and brand alignment for those brands who want to tell a new story to their customers. Not just connecting with the conscious consumer of hippies, but also appealing to traditional rev heads at the same time. Now, futurists don't leave you with 3 silver bullet points to fix all your problems, but we do say that when we anchor ourselves to some of these megatrends we've covered here today, the future can be way better than we all think. And I want to leave you with 4 questions as opposed to silver bullet points here today to get you thinking about. Ask yourself, how can you get 2x the result or social impact with half the effort through technology, but also human creativity? Which old analog processes in your organization don't offer you any immediately actionable data insights and need upgrading immediately? What's the compound effect of your competition or your attackers adopting the right exponential technologies while you simply don't by 2025? And finally, what would your competition or your attackers not want you to do next? Ladies and gentlemen, start preparing for the future today, because it is where you and your kids are going to spend the rest of your lives. See you in that future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. That was fantastic. Thank you. And you know, so much to consider and think through there. But I think, you know, for me, that was the points I was remembering from your last time, was just sort of thinking about where the competition was going to go, and perhaps, you know, where we had to position ourselves to be sort of ahead of the game a little bit. Can I ask you to fill out these sheets, the evaluation sheets? We are very keen on your feedback, and we're very keen to hear what you want to hear for the next time. We have drinks and nibbles coming up. Please stay around and have a little bit of a chat. We are getting it to the end of the year. I think if anything was brought today, it was the thinking that we need to converse and talk about, you know, what the future is and where it's going. And the strength is through diverse thinking. That's been, you know, what I've gathered from this, is sort of pulling myself out of that comfort zone and starting to think about the other aspects of our society, of our businesses, and how we sort of need to endure trust around a lot of those processes. We have ourselves been through many digital transformation projects with clients and customers. We're noticing some good and some bad. We've seen some terrible incidents more recently in Australia. And if you are looking to have a review, looking to reconsider, or just starting to think about where your business needs to be next year, please come and talk to us. We're our good partners at Palo and Google. We're more than happy to have those conversations.